In the vibrant land of the vegetable kingdom, the aroma of fruits and melons filled the air. The Chaoyang vegetable market nestled beside a clear river, bustling with noise and vitality. And by the high steps at the market entrance, a hunched tomato grandmother, Hong Guo, sat like a sculpture of time. Her wrinkled red skin appeared somewhat dim in the sunlight, yet her weathered eyes still gazed at the distant flowing river, as if silently awaiting something important to return. In this vibrant vegetable kingdom, the other vegetables all knew this somewhat special tomato grandmother. The passage of 77 seasons had left deep marks on her. Everyone knew that her right eye had lost its luster due to endless tears in her youth, leaving only her left eye, still stubbornly glimmering with a trace of hope. What kind of profound love could make a tomato spend her entire life waiting so steadfastly? The tomato grandmother's name was Hong Guo, and her story began in the distant cauliflower village. At that time, Hong Guo was still a plump and juicy small tomato, about the equivalent of a 15-year-old human, full of youthful vitality. By chance, she met Jin Sui, a handsome corn ear stationed in Cauliflower Village, through a kind matchmaker bean pod. Hong Guo recalled the scene of their first meeting, her voice still filled with tenderness. His corn kernels were full and glossy, he looked very upright and kind, and his voice was as gentle as a summer breeze. Jin Sui's refinement and maturity completely overturned Hong Guo's usual impression of corn being rough and uncultivated. Their hearts quietly drew closer at that moment, and they fell in love at first sight. A month later, beside a field blooming with golden sunflowers, they held a simple and heartwarming wedding. That day, the entire Cauliflower Village was immersed in a festive atmosphere of joy. Pumpkin lanterns hung high, attracting many curious vegetables to come and watch, sharing in this sweetness and happiness. 77 years have passed, but every time Hong Guo recalls her wedding day, warm memories flood back into her heart like a tide. That's not just a ceremony, but also a commitment to living together. After the wedding, Jin Sui always affectionately called Hong Guo Little Red, which was the custom in Cauliflower Village. He deeply cherished this pure and refined wife, often praising her gently. "Little Red, you are beautiful even without dressing up." He not only entrusted all his monthly harvest of plump corn kernels to Hong Guo's care, but also encouraged her to read and write more, to learn more knowledge, hoping she could have a broader world. Jin Sui's younger brother, an honest and adorable little corn ear, was also very kind to Hong Guo, always calling her sister-in-law affectionately. Their mother, a kind and amiable old corn cob, also liked the sensible new daughter-in-law very much, and the home was filled with a warm and harmonious atmosphere. Immersed in happiness, Hong Guo felt like the luckiest tomato in the vegetable kingdom. However, this sweetness did not last long. 2 years after their marriage, a pest crisis that swept through the entire vegetable kingdom suddenly broke out. Jin Sui, as the corn captain protecting the vegetable kingdom, began to be extremely busy, rushing out before dawn every day and returning home late at night with a tired body. Jin Sui's mother had repeatedly sent him to resign from his position as corn captain and return to their hometown in Chili Mountain for a stable life, but Jin Sui firmly refused. He deeply understood his responsibilities. He was not only the support of his family but also a guardian of the vegetable kingdom. Jin Sui said firmly, "Mother, I am your son and also a citizen of the vegetable kingdom. The time has come for the kingdom to need us. Only with a country can we have a home. You should go back to Chili Mountain first. Don't worry about me. I'll be careful." These words were full of his love for his family, and even more so reflected his sense of righteousness towards the nation. On a foggy morning, the insect army launched a large-scale invasion, and the vegetable kingdom sounded the alarm. Jin Sui's corn troops were ordered to resist and defend their homeland. Hong Guo specifically rushed to the lush banyan tree at the village entrance to see him off. Before parting, Jin Sui held Hong Guo's leaf tightly and said gently, "Wait for me to return." These simple 4 words carried his promise to his wife and his hope for the future. At that time, the 17-year-old Hong Guo knew nothing of the cruelty of war. She naively thought that Jean Sui would return safely after some time, just like before, and they would live happily together as they had in the past. However, she never imagined that this parting would be their eternal farewell. The gears of fate had already quietly turned, pushing them towards an unpredictable future. On the battlefield, which was like a giant mixer, shouts of killing filled the air, and smoke billowed everywhere. Jean Sui led his corn soldiers, facing a massive insect army, bravely resisting the enemy's fierce attacks with their very lives. In a situation where their weapons and equipment were far inferior, he took the lead and fought valiantly. His figure was like a shining star on the battlefield, inspiring all the soldiers. The battle was in a stalemate, and Hongguar waited anxiously at home for news of Jean Sui. During this time, she received a few letters from the front intermittently, the paper crumpled and the handwriting somewhat laotsal, revealing the cruelty of the battlefield and Jean Sui's exhaustion between the lines. The last letter was even more incomplete, with only a few short lines that read, "My 2P soldiers have sacrificed themselves. You are still young. In case I sacrifice myself, you should find someone good and marry him." These words, like sharp thorns, deeply pierced Hong Guer's heart. As the battle situation rapidly deteriorated, Jean Sui's corn troops were ultimately defeated. To protect the safety of Hong Guer's family, Jean Sui had entrusted other vegetables who had managed to escape to escort Hong Guer and his mother to a safe area far from the war, with a promise to reunite there in the future. Hong Guer held onto a glimmer of hope, looking forward to seeing her Jean Sui again. However, the long wait brought only endless silence. Due to the turbulent situation at the time, Hong Guer stayed in the shelter for a while, then had no choice but to return to Jean Sui's home in Chili Mountain first, taking care of the elderly corn cob while silently waiting there for news of her husband. During those days, Hong Guer was restless all day long, her eyes staring blankly into the distance. Other vegetable friends tried to persuade her not to hold on to false hopes, but she couldn't listen at all. Hong Guer murmured to herself, "Those days were so hard to endure. You long for someone in your heart. You think of them during the day. You think of them at night, day and night, day after day. The more you hope, the more distant it seems." Year after year, she would wake up from nightmares every night, her dreams always filled with the smoke and terror of the battlefield. Yet she could never see Jean Sui's figure. Longing was like an invisible shackle, tightly binding her heart. Every year, Hong Guer would ask people to inquire about Jean Sui at the front line, but all the letters were like throwing stones into a bottomless pit, with no response. 7 long seasons passed, and Hong Guer, the entire tomato, was immersed in the pain of intertwined despair and hope. Prolonged crying gradually dimmed the light in her right eye, and eventually, she lost her sight in it. Until one day, Hong Guer heard that a comrade of Jean Sui would pass by Chili Mountain. She was as excited as if grasping a lifeline and eagerly went to inquire. However, what she received from that comrade was the devastating news that Jean Sui had already sacrificed himself. At that moment, Hong Guer could no longer restrain the grief in her heart. She ran home crying all the way. Her husband had died in battle, and they had left no offspring, which made her feel incredibly guilty, as if she had lost the meaning of existence herself. Afterward, Hong Guer carefully remade a corn husk battle robe that Jean Sui had worn during his lifetime into a black coat. She sewed it by hand, every stitch and thread filled with deep longing for her husband. She had her first photograph taken in her life at the market's photo studio, and in the photo, she was wearing that black coat, her expression sorrowful yet resolute. Not long after her husband's sacrifice, her mother-in-law, the old corn cob, also passed away due to excessive grief. From then on, Hong Guer completely lost all her relatives in Chili Mountain, left alone to face endless loneliness and longing. Her younger brother and mother had repeatedly sent her to move with them to the distant and peaceful Fruit Island to start a new life, but Hong Guer chose to stay. Because Jean Sui's roots were here, every bit of their memories was deeply rooted in this land, and she wanted to stay here for the rest of her life, guarding their former home. Later, The small corn house left by Jean Sui was also reclaimed by the kingdom, and Hong Guar lost her last place of shelter, having to live as a dependent in the home of a kind Aunt Pumpkin, leading a life of hardship and loneliness. Initially, many enthusiastic vegetables came to introduce new partners to her, hoping she could step out of the shadows of the past and start a new life. But Hong Guar refused them all. In her heart, Jean Sui's place was irreplaceable, and this love was like a deep brand, never to be erased. For years of living as a dependent, lonely and helpless, gradually wore down Hong Guar's will, and she could barely hold on. The burdens of life pressed down on her slender vines, making her feel exhausted. In an autumn harvest season, with golden rice and fragrant fruits and melons, Hong Guar was introduced and married her second husband, a simple and honest big winter melon. The story of Jean Sui became her deepest secret, buried in her heart. She carefully treasured this unforgettable love, unwilling to mention it to anyone. After marrying the big winter melon, she gave birth to 2 honest little winter melons and a lively little pumpkin. To raise her 3 children, Hong Guar endured unimaginable hardships. She worked the most strenuous job of washing vegetable leaves, cleaned the dirtiest piles of rotten vegetables, and even worked as a vegetable porter on the steps of Chaoyang Vegetable Market. With her slender vines, she strived to support the hope of the entire family. After her second husband passed away, the children gradually grew up and had their own lives. Hong Guar felt that her days were numbered, and the wish buried for decades resurfaced in her heart. She hoped that before she died, she could find out how Jean Sui had sacrificed himself back then, and where his soul now rested. This obsession, like a seed buried deep underground, sprouted again in the twilight of her life. Initially, the younger son, Little Pumpkin, somewhat misunderstood his mother's obsession, thinking that the past was gone, so why bother pursuing those long-sealed memories? But the elder son, Big Winter Melon, deeply understood his mother's feelings. He often saw his mother secretly crying in the quiet nights. When he asked her why she was sad, she always remained silent, keeping all the bitterness hidden in her heart. Finally, the elder son, Big Winter Melon, did not disappoint his mother's expectations. He traveled everywhere, consulted countless materials, and finally found a vague record in an ancient vegetable kingdom battle history. In the battle to defend the periphery of Chaoyang Vegetable Market, the corn troops bravely resisted for 3 days, and finally, in a fierce attack, all the soldiers, including the corn captain Jean Sui, heroically sacrificed themselves at the entrance of the market. This short passage, however, struck Hong Guar's heart like a heavy hammer, making her burst into tears. She seemed to see Jean Sui bravely fighting on the battlefield, defending their homeland, and also understood that the wait for me to return from their parting had ultimately become a promise that could never be fulfilled. The younger son, Little Pumpkin, was also deeply moved by Jean Sui's heroic deeds. He finally understood the profound love and obsession in his mother's heart. He actively joined the ranks of helping his mother find Jean Sui's whereabouts, determined to find a resting place for this father he had never met. After a long search and many inquiries, the elder son accidentally found a volunteer organization caring for veterans in a Vegetable Kingdom newspaper. With a try-it-and-see attitude, he sent Jean Sui's relevant information, never expecting to actually find related clues. Today, Jean Sui's name is solemnly engraved on the monument to heroes on the distant Fruit Island, for future generations to look up to. His heroic deeds will forever be remembered by the Vegetable Kingdom. The volunteers also used the technology of the Vegetable Kingdom to combine photos of Jean Sui and Hong Guar from their youth. In that composite photo, the young couple smiled brightly, full of yearning for a beautiful future life. That night, Tomato Grandmother Hong Guar was so excited that she couldn't sleep, just like a child. Although her body was very weak at this time, her vines had become inflexible, and she often had to go in and out of the vegetable hospital. The 93-year-old Hong Guar felt an unprecedented strength burning in her heart. Ignoring her children's objections, she insisted on going to the distant Fruit Island to see Jean Sui, who had been on her mind day and night. Hongwa firmly said, "If I die on the way to Fruit Island, take my seed with me and let him know that I am here to see him." This sentence is full of her unwavering love for Jin Sui until death, and also shows her firm determination to see her lover for the last time. Hongwa Air said, "I have no more hesitation. My old bone will eventually return to the soil. As long as I know he has a place to rest, I am not afraid of anything." For this deep love, she has already devoted her whole life. Now, she just wants to see where he rests with her own eyes and put an end to this long wait. On a sunny day, 93-year-old tomato grandmother Hongwa, accompanied by her children, boarded a slowly flying airship, crossed high mountains and vast rivers, and finally arrived at the distant Fruit Island, in front of the solemn and dignified monument of martyrs. As she trembled and reached out her wrinkled hand, gently caressing the cold stone tablet engraved with the name of Jin Sui, tears accumulated for more than 70 years rolled down like broken beads, dripping onto the stone tablet as if telling her endless longing and deep affection. Hongwa choked up and said, "I came to see you at all costs. When you left, there wasn't even a word of farewell. For you, my tears dried up." This call, full of grievances, longing, and deep affection, crossed the barriers of time and space, and was conveyed to my distant lover. At that moment, perhaps Tomato Granny Hongwa returned to the beautiful scene when she first met Corn Ear Jin Sui in the flower vegetable village. The love deeply rooted in her heart, like a vine entwining life, crossed the boundaries of life and death, accompanied her throughout her life, and ultimately turned into her eternal watch next to Chaoyang Vegetable Market. And that once plump and rosy body, now covered in the folds of time, still shines like an eternal red lantern at the entrance of Chaoyang Vegetable Market, quietly illuminating her endless longing for her lover and the sincere emotions sealed by time in the vegetable kingdom.